"Marry me right now or they'll punish us." The words were a ghost of a sound, a desperate whisper carried on the wind. If you believe a person's fate can be changed by a single choice, like this video. And subscribe for more stories of the heart from a time long past. The man knelt by the creek, the cold water a familiar shock against his skin. His name was Caleb, though few had cause to use it. The land knew him by the scuff of his boots and the quiet respect he paid it. He moved with a purpose that had been worn into him by years of solitude, his senses tuned to the subtle language of the wilderness, the snap of a twig, the shift of the wind, the shadow that was not there a moment before. He was checking a line of snares he'd set for rabbit, his movements economical and sure. His horse, a buckskin gelding named Dust, waited patiently on the bank, reins looped over a low-hanging branch. It was a life of deliberate silence, a world shrunk to the necessities of survival, and he had long ago made his peace with it. A flicker of movement upstream, wrong and out of place, drew his eye. It was not the fluid grace of a deer or the scuttling panic of a coyote. It was human. He rose slowly, every line of his body coiled with caution, his hand resting near the worn grip of the pistol at his hip. He moved through the cottonwoods like a predator, silent and unseen, the damp earth muting his footfalls. There, huddled in a thicket of willows, was a woman. Or a girl, it was hard to tell. She was small, with hair as black as a raven's wing, matted with mud and leaves. Her clothes were rags, a tattered cotton shift that offered little protection from the elements or the eyes of the world. He could see the tremor that ran through her frame, a shudder born of cold and terror. He watched her for a long moment, his mind a quiet ledger of facts. She was alone. She was frightened. And judging by the direction from which she'd come, she was running from the railroad camps, a place where life was cheaper than the steel rails they laid. He had seen the men who worked for the company, hard men with cruel eyes who treated their imported laborers like cattle. He backed away as silently as he had come, his decision made. He could not leave her. It wasn't in him. He circled back around, making just enough noise for a careful person to hear him approach. A deliberate scuff of his boot on stone, a soft word to his horse. He didn't want to come upon her like a wolf. When he stepped into the clearing, she was already on her feet, a sharpened stick held in front of her like a spear. Her eyes were wide with a fear so profound it looked like a physical wound. She was a cornered thing, ready to fight to the last. Caleb stopped a good 10 paces away, holding his hands up, palms open and empty. He unhooked his canteen from his saddle and set it on the ground, then slid it gently across the dirt toward her. He followed it with a piece of dried venison wrapped in oilcloth. He said nothing. Words were a currency he rarely spent, and he doubted they shared the same language anyway. She stared at the offerings, then at him, her gaze flicking between his face and his hands, searching for the trick. He simply stood, patient as a mountain, letting the silence speak for him. It spoke of his lack of aggression, of his simple intent. Her knuckles were white on the stick. The sound came suddenly, a rumble of shod hooves and harsh laughter from downriver. Her head snapped toward the noise, and the terror in her eyes sharpened into pure panic. Without a thought, Caleb closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He grabbed her arm, his touch firm but not rough, and pulled her down with him, back into the deep shadow of the willows. The riders came into view, 3 of them, their faces coarse and sunburned. They wore the colors of the Union Pacific Security Force, men paid to enforce the company's brutal will. "So tracks back a ways," one of them growled, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. "She can't have gotten far." Caleb held her fast, his body a shield between her and the world. He could feel the frantic beat of her heart against his arm, a trapped bird's frantic pulse. The riders passed, their voices fading into the murmur of the creek. The air, which had been tight with tension, slowly eased. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He released her arm, but she remained frozen, crouched in the dirt. The danger had passed, but it was only a reprieve. He knew those men. They were trackers, relentless and cruel. They would not give up. He looked down at her. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a deep, hollow weariness. He knew he couldn't leave her here. His solitary life had just ended. He looked at her, then pointed to himself. Then he pointed to his horse, and then gestured toward the jagged line of the distant mountains, a direction that led away from the railroad, away from civilization, away from the men who hunted her. It was the only safety he could offer. He was asking her to place her life into the hands of a complete stranger, a man of a different race in a land that was not her own. She studied his face, her dark eyes searching his. He met her gaze without flinching, his own eyes the color of a stormy sky, honest and direct. He saw the calculation behind her fear, the weighing of one terrible risk against another. After a long minute that stretched into an eternity, she gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. She had chosen. She picked up the canteen and the venison, a practical acceptance of his offer. Trust was not yet present, but a fragile alliance had been forged in the crucible of shared threat. He helped her to her feet, and for the first time, he noticed how small and light she was, like a bird with bones made of reeds. He led her to his horse, lifted her into the saddle with an ease that surprised them both, and then swung up behind her. He nudged Dust into a steady walk, heading for the high country, leaving the river and its dangers behind them. They traveled for 2 days, a silent pair moving through an immense and indifferent landscape. He pushed them hard, wanting to put as much distance as possible between them and the pursuers. He watched their back trail constantly, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of Dust. At night, he made cold camps, foregoing a fire that might betray their position. He gave her the better of their meager rations and his only blanket, taking the watch himself while she slept an exhausted, fitful sleep. On the 3rd day, they found a secluded spot where a spring-fed stream pooled in a basin of smooth, grey stones, hidden by a stand of aspens. He decided they were far enough away to risk a brief rest. He needed to let the horse graze properly and to clean the grime of the trail from his own skin. He dismounted and helped her down. Using gestures, he indicated the pool. "Water," he said, the word sounding rough from disuse. He pointed to his own dirty face and hands. Clean, he took a small piece of lye soap from his little bag and placed it on a rock for her. Then, he turned his back, giving her privacy, and walked to the edge of the clearing to stand watch. The rustle of cloth and the soft splash of water told him she was taking the opportunity. Minutes later, a shout echoed from the ridge above them. "There!" It was a voice he recognized. They had been found. He spun around, drawing his pistol, and saw her by the water's edge. She had shed the outer layer of her rags to wash, and stood only in a thin, torn shift. In his haste to warn her, he took in the whole scene at once, the water, the trees, and the horrific map of scars and welts that crisscrossed her back, a testament to the brutality she had escaped. His breath caught in his throat. At the same moment, the riders appeared on the ridge. She saw them, saw Caleb looking at her, and her mind worked with the speed of desperation. She scrambled toward him, grabbing the front of his shirt, her voice a raw, urgent whisper. "They see you." "They see me," she pleaded in broken, heavily accented English. "Marry me. Now. Or they punish us." The 3 riders spurred their horses down the slope, arrogance in the set of their shoulders. The leader, a man with a sun-bleached mustache and cruel, piggy eyes, reined in a few yards away. His gaze slid over Caleb, dismissive, before settling on the woman with a look of vile ownership. "Well, look what we have here," the leader sneered, his voice thick with contempt. "Found yourself a protector, did you, girl? Step aside, friend. That's company property you're with." Caleb didn't move. He stood like a rock, a silent bulwark between the woman and the men who hunted her. Her desperate words, "Marry me," echoed in his mind. It was a wild, nonsensical ploy, but he understood the frantic strategy behind it. A runaway laborer was property. A white man's wife, that was a different matter. It might not work, but it was a chance, a sliver of leverage in a deadly negotiation. He kept his body angled, his gun hand free, his eyes locked on the leader. He let the silence stretch, a weapon in itself. The woman, Mai, as he would later learn her name was, pressed closer behind him, her small hand still clutching his shirt. He could feel her trembling, but it was the tremor of a taut wire, not of surrender. "She's with me," Caleb said. His voice was low and flat, devoid of emotion, but it carried the weight of an iron bar. It was a simple statement of fact, a line drawn in the dirt. The leader chuckled, a humorless, grating sound. "With you? I got a bill of sale says she's with the Union Pacific Railroad. Cost Mr. Durant a pretty penny to ship her over. Now, I'll say it one last time. Step." Aside, he leaned forward in his saddle, his hand dropping to rest on the butt of his own pistol. The other two men fanned out, their expressions hardening. Caleb didn't waste another word. He was not a man for debate. He had made his choice back at the creek. The world seemed to slow, the sounds of the creek and the rustling aspens fading to a dull roar in Caleb's ears. He saw the subtle shift in the leader's shoulders, the tightening of his jaw, the universal signs of a man about to commit to violence. One of the men to the right made the mistake. He drew his pistol, but his movements were clumsy, eager. Caleb's draw was a fluid, economical motion, a blur of practiced instinct. The gunshot was a sharp crack that sent a flock of birds scattering from the trees. The man on the right yelped, his gun clattering to the ground as he clutched a hand that was suddenly bloody. Before the other two could react, Caleb had cocked the hammer again, the muzzle of his Colt now level with the leader's chest. "Leave," Caleb said, the single word hanging in the air with the smoke from his pistol. The leader stared, his bravado evaporating in the face of such cold, brutal efficiency. He looked at his bleeding man, then at the unwavering barrel of Caleb's gun, and finally at the unwavering resolve in Caleb's eyes. He had misjudged his man. This was not some drifter, this was someone who knew how to finish a fight. He spat on the ground. "This ain't over," he snarled, but the threat was hollow. He wheeled his horse around, gathering his wounded man, and the three of them retreated back up the slope, their departure a cloud of dust and curses. The sudden silence that fell in their wake was deafening. The immediate danger was gone. Caleb slowly lowered his pistol, the adrenaline beginning to ebb, leaving a cold calm in its place. He turned to look at the woman. She was staring at him, her dark eyes wide, a mixture of fear, shock, and something else he couldn't quite name. He looked at her, at the raw desperation that had made her invent such a wild story. He thought of the scars on her back. He understood. He gave a slow, single nod. It was an answer to her plea. An acceptance of the strange, dangerous fiction she had created for them both. They made their way to an old, abandoned line shack he knew of, nestled in a high valley. It was little more than 4 walls and a leaky roof, but it was shelter. As a bitter wind began to howl through the pines, he built a small, careful fire in the stone hearth, the first real warmth they'd had in days. The small space filled with a flickering, orange light. He saw her shiver, her ragged clothes offering no defense against the encroaching cold. Without a word, he took off his heavy wool coat and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame, the sleeves hanging well past her hands. She clutched it to her, sinking deeper into its warmth, her eyes fixed on the flames. Later, as he sat cleaning his pistol, she busied herself. He noticed she had a small, cloth-wrapped bundle, something she must have hidden away during her captivity. From it, she produced a needle and a spool of dark thread. She held up the sleeve of his coat, pointing to a long tear near the cuff that he'd gotten from a tangle with a briar patch weeks ago and never bothered to fix. He simply nodded. While he worked, she began to stitch the tear. Her movements were small and precise, her head bent in concentration. He watched her from the corner of his eye. The firelight played across her face, softening the harsh lines of fear and exhaustion, revealing a quiet dignity beneath. She was not just mending a coat, she was performing an act of care, a silent thank you, a small piece of order brought to their chaotic world. It was a language he understood better than words. When she finished, the seam was a line of tiny, perfect stitches, stronger than the original fabric. She folded the coat and set it aside. He finished cleaning his weapon, then banked the fire for the night. As he prepared to take the first watch by the door, he looked over and saw she had already fallen asleep, curled up in his blanket, his mended coat drawn over her like a shield. The snow came that night, a thick, silent blanket that trapped them in the valley. For 3 days, they were marooned in the tiny shack, the world outside a swirl of white. The forced proximity should have been tense, but it settled into a comfortable, quiet rhythm. They existed in a shared silence, communicating through gestures and actions. He would venture out into the storm to check his snares, returning with a rabbit or two. He would skin and cook the meat, always offering her the first and best portion. She, in turn, kept the fire fed and the small space as tidy as it could be. She found a handful of wild herbs in a tin left by a previous occupant and made a hot, bitter tea that warmed them from the inside out. One afternoon, he sat by the fire, mending a frayed strap on his saddlebag. His hands, though calloused and scarred, were surprisingly deft with the awl and wax thread. She watched him, her gaze lingering on his patient, capable hands. The same hands that had been so swift and deadly were now performing a simple act of repair. She picked up a small object from her bundle. It was a bird, intricately carved from a single piece of dark wood. She held it out to him on the palm of her hand. He took it, turning it over to admire the craftsmanship. He looked at her, a silent question in his eyes. "Barbara," she said, her voice soft. She pointed to herself. Barbara's father. It was the first piece of her past she had offered him, a single word that spoke of a home, a family, a life before all this. He handed the bird back to her gently. He understood that she was not just the sum of her trauma, she was a person, with a history and a soul. He looked from the small bird in her hand to her face, and he felt a shift inside him. The detached, principled protection he had offered was changing, deepening into something fiercely personal. He was no longer just helping a stranger, he was protecting Mai. The snow stopped on the 4th day. The world was pristine and silent, draped in white. But the peace was shattered by the bark of a dog. Caleb was on his feet in an instant, pistol in his hand, peering through a chink in the cabin wall. There were 6 of them this time, including the leader from the river. They had a tracker with them, an old man with a face like a leather map, and a pair of lean, hungry-looking dogs. They had found the shack. "Come on out, friend," the leader called, his voice smug. "We know you're in there. We just want the girl. Give her up, and we'll let you ride out of here." Caleb knew it was a lie. They would leave no witnesses. He looked at Mai. Her face was pale, but her eyes were not filled with terror. They were burning with a cold, hard fire. He would not let them take her. He checked the loads in his pistol. He had 5 shots. There were 6 of them. The odds were not good. As he braced himself by the door, ready to make his stand, she did something that stunned him. She walked to the hearth, picked up a piece of charcoal, and drew 2 straight, black lines down her cheeks, from her eyes to her jaw. It was a deliberate, ritualistic act. She was not painting her face for war in his world, but for one in her own. It was a declaration. She would not be property. She would not be a victim. She picked up the heavy iron skillet from the hearth, its weight a solid, comforting presence in her hands. She came and stood beside him, not behind him. She looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw not a plea for rescue, but a promise of alliance. She was choosing her own ground, her own fate. He was no longer her protector. He was her partner. He gave her a grim, approving nod. They would face this together. The fight was a maelstrom of desperation and fury. Caleb kicked the door open and fired, the shot echoing across the snow-covered valley. One of the dogs went down. He used the flimsy door as momentary cover, firing twice more, his shots aimed not to kill but to incapacitate. One rider clutched his shoulder, another tumbled from his saddle as his horse shied. The remaining men charged, firing wildly. Splinters exploded from the door frame. Caleb felt a searing pain in his arm as a bullet grazed him. Just as the leader reached the doorway, Mai swung the iron skillet with all her might. The heavy pan connected with the man's head with a sickening thud, sending him sprawling into the snow, senseless. Her sudden, ferocious attack created the opening Caleb needed. He burst from the cabin, tackling another rider and using the man's own knife to end the threat. The last man, seeing the tide turn so violently, lost his nerve. He fired one last panicked shot that went wide, then turned his horse and fled, disappearing into the pines. Silence descended once more, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the ragged sound of their own breathing. It was over. They had won. They stood in the aftermath, surrounded by the mess and ruin of the fight, the clean snow stained red. They were both wounded, bleeding, and exhausted, but they were alive. And they were free. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale, golden light over the valley. He looked at her, at the fierce charcoal lines on her face, now smudged with sweat and grime. He reached out and gently touched a cut on her cheekbone. She flinched, then held still, allowing his touch. She, in turn, saw the gash on his arm, his sleeve dark with blood. She tore a strip from the hem of her shift and, with practiced hands, began to bind the wound. Their eyes met over the simple act of mending each other. He saw the resilience, the pride, the incredible strength of the woman before him. "My name is Caleb," he said, the words feeling momentous, a true introduction after all they had been through. A small, weary, but genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. It transformed her face. She said, her voice clear and strong. He finished tying the bandage on her arm. He looked out at the vast, open country stretching before them, a new horizon, a blank page. "We should go," he said. And the word "we" felt like the most natural thing in the world. He offered her his hand, and she took it,